and they run all the way through that block, right through where you're standing, clear to the edge of the fence line. And when we first found those post holes, we didn't identify this pathway next to it. It wasn't until we opened up this large block where we saw these pathways connecting large areas of the garden together. And what we have to answer now is where this garden goes in the south of the property, and does it make any additional turns. So Atticus and I just today have actually revealed the surface of the clay pathway in the south. It is situated under a little bit more fill than it was over here, and there's maybe a slight grade down, but it's not as steep as we once thought. It actually looks like it's maintaining a pretty flat surface here. The natural ground surface today is just a little bit thicker over on this side of the property. As we continue to work here, we'll not only expose this clay path, but in this area we're actually going to remove the clay path. Typically in archaeology, we excavate the majority of the things that we find. It's through excavating them that we learn what they are, when they are constructed, how they were used. In the case of the clay path so far, we've left the majority of it intact to be able to serve as a visual representation of what it is, but we have to be able to excavate underneath of that clay path in certain areas to really understand how it was constructed and what might be sealed beneath it. Particularly in the southern portion of the property, we have likely the location of a brick kiln nearby. And what would be left by that brick kiln are going to be burned streaks in the natural soil on the ground. And because the clay pathway was installed after the house was already built and constructed, we know that that kiln would have been constructed, used, and disassembled before this clay pathway would have went down. So it's very possible the remnants of that brick kiln might be underneath of this clay pathway. Now the clay pathway is also fairly thick. You can see about how thick it is up in that block, where the lower portions are the natural subsoil, which is where we stop excavating in archaeology. Here, in the little windows we've been able to see from modern tree roots that we've removed, this clay is going to be pretty thick. They moved a lot of soil on this property to create these pathways. So when we excavate through here, it's going to take us a little bit of time, but once we finish our analysis on the clay pathway, then we are going to focus on the browner area of this area, which is predominantly going to be planting features, hopefully some large planting beds based off of what we have seen so far. In other areas, we have planting beds that border other pathways or post holes. It depends on where we're at in the property. But we're very hopeful that we'll have a big turnout here of more garden features. At this point, we really haven't understood the southern extent of the garden enclosure yet. We've done a lot of good work on the northern half of the garden enclosure, and the southern half is something we still really have to figure out. Further to the east, where we previously excavated one of these cuttings, the plow, which the property here was plowed between about 1850 and 1880. The soil there was shallow enough that the plow really disturbed a lot of the evidence of the garden. Here, the plow did not go as deep, so we're hopeful that a lot of the planting features are preserved that we can see and map and get an understanding of what's going on in the southern portion.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions?
Yeah,
it's a great question. So along the profile, and of course some of it is covered by tarp right now, but we have a lot of brick rubble on this property, and it's from a couple different things. One, any property that you have structures built out of brick on that are going to stand for hundreds of years, you're going to find brick material all throughout the property, especially when the property is plowed. But we have a much higher concentration here of not just remnants or tiny little flecks of bricks, but enormous distributions of brick rubble. It's from two different things. The first thing that it's from is the oyster bricks, the bricks that are failing in the initial firing process when John Custis' house is originally being constructed, the wells being lined with bricks, the smokehouse is made out of bricks, the kitchen's all made out of bricks. We have an enormous distribution of the bricks that are failing that firing process and are being either discarded in areas of the property, or other areas of the property are being used to create rammed brick rubble pathways. So we have a lot from that. The bricks that you see in that profile are from a later period when the public hospital owned this property. And in 1885, they had a very large fire at their complex. It destroyed about 5 or 6 of their brick buildings. They took the rubble from those buildings, which all sat beyond our fence line here to the west. They took the rubble from those buildings and used them to build roadways across this property. They had plans to expand their complex out onto this property. Thankfully, they did not do that and left it with just those roads. Those roadways show up very well on our ground penetrating radar scans as well as our magnetometry scans, because those brick rubble roadways are not only full of predominantly brick rubble, it's also filled with all the burned nails from those structures. So they show up really well on both of those scans. And even when we put a drone in the air in the summer months, you will see that the grass is a slightly different color over top of that brick surface than it is. So we have a keen eye on our drone photography. Sometimes you can see where those pathways are just from a very slight difference in grass color. So that's where a lot of that particular brick is coming from. One of those pathways runs right through here. We also have a bunch of concrete slabs from some bungalows that were built in the 20th century for patients at the hospital that had tuberculosis.
When you find plant material, how do you identify what period it came from and what type of plant?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good question. So when we excavate archaeologically, it is based on the law of superposition that we're able to understand what period certain things are coming from. All the law of superposition is saying is that because we know gravity exists and we know how gravity works, things that are on the bottom will naturally be older than the things on the top when it's undisturbed, right? That's the key element there. It's an undisturbed context. Things at the bottom will naturally be older than things on top. You drop something on the ground and it stays there. You drop something else. How do I know which one was dropped first? Unless I came and scooted something underneath of it, I know that the one on top had to have been the last thing to be dropped. So as we're excavating through specific distinct soil layers, and we have date ranges from those, when they're not disturbed, we're able to tell, all right, well, we just removed a soil layer, right, like the plow zone, because we know the property did not begin to be plowed until 1850. When I get underneath of that plow zone, what does that tell me about anything that I find at that point? Exactly, pre-1850. When we find the next layer and the next layer, and it's all based on how they are positioned within each other and the artifacts within them that we're able to determine that. So we have a lot of planting features from the public hospital, but those are planting features that will typically be in the plowed soil or cutting through the plowed soil, which means that they were constructed after the property was plowed. And then we'll get underneath of that plow zone, we'll get into some other layers. And when we see those planting features sealed underneath, then we know that those are Custis era planting features.
And you can tell what type of plants they were.
We can through some of the samples that we send out to third-party firms to run analysis on. Now, when we excavate planting features here, we can get a general idea of what we're looking at based on the root structure, but that's usually a difference between saying this is a tree versus this is a small plant. It is through taking soil samples from those features, sending them off to specific laboratories that will break them down and look for two different things. The first thing that they're going to look for is plant pollen. Now, pollen is distributed everywhere, but you're going to see very high concentrations of pollen from the plant right around its immediate area. And if we have good pollen preservation, pollen can be as specific as our thumbprint is to us, right? That pollen can tell us not just that we're looking at a pine tree, but what type of pine tree we're looking at. However, for us, our pollen preservation is not so great. So the results that we've gotten back so far from those samples are, we're looking at a rose family or the apple tree family, but not much more specific. Okay. The second thing that they'll test for is plant phytolith silica. So silica is naturally occurring in the ground, and through a plant's lifetime, as it's absorbing water and nutrients from the soil, that silica will come up with it. It's very microscopic. And that silica is not used by the plant, and it builds up around the edge of the plant cell wall. Different plants have different shaped plant cell walls, and if that plant dies and degrades in the soil, well, that silica will be left intact, and sometimes it will still retain the shape of that plant cell wall that it had built up around. Again, if the preservation is good enough, we can use those phytolith silicas to get an idea of what we're looking at as well. So kind of using the two of those together, usually it's kind of like when preservation for one isn't great, maybe the other one might be a little bit better. Here we're not so great on either account. But we'll take the general idea that we get from those and then compare them to the known plants that John Custis is ordering from overseas to then be able to understand, all right, if we have a rose family plant here, we know he was buying this specific type of roses, well, that's likely the type of roses that we need.
Thank you.
And in my notebook, I have some pictures that they gave us of the microscopic things that they find and that they look at. So I'll show that to you.
Okay.